Well, hello and welcome. I'm excited that you're able to join us today for this week's conversation with three leaders in local government. Today, we've just got an excellent panel, and we're going to be exploring their perspectives on maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. We're going to be talking about the challenges that community leaders are facing from an engagement standpoint and the creative ways that they're continuing to engage their residents safely and effectively during the pandemic. The intent of the conversations is really to just hear how these leaders are dealing with the issues and responding to the pandemic and making that connection with their residents. We want to be able to share ideas and for you to pick up some fresh perspectives or maybe a new strategy, something that you may be able to apply when you're addressing issues in your own community. Here's the format of how today's going to go. We'll take a few minutes for each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll talk a little bit about their backgrounds. I'll kick off the conversation and ask several questions of each of the panelists to get their perspectives, and then we'll offer up the opportunity for the panelists to have a little bit of a conversation between each other if there's any issues that we want to explore a little bit further. If there's any other questions, we'll explore them at that time. The session will generally take about an hour, but if that sounds okay with everybody, we will go ahead and get the meeting underway. Let me introduce our first panelist. David Parrish is the city manager in Greensboro, North Carolina. He's been in Greensboro since 2013 and has been serving as city manager since 2018. Dave's held numerous leadership positions over the course of his career, and he's really active in his community, especially with the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Greensboro Board. Although I have to admit, David, if you look at your resume, I'm really impressed by just the amount of civic involvement and leadership that you're showing in your community and your profession. It's very wide and it's very broad. It's very clear that you're a strong leader in your community. And one thing I picked up on was just an appreciation for how you're a data-driven decision maker. David's a graduate of UNC, which has a soft spot in my heart because that's where my son and his family live. So thanks, David, for spending a little bit of time with us today. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit more, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Glad to be here, and thanks for the invitation. Again, David Parrish, serving in Greensboro, North Carolina, and a wife and 3 kids that I'm raising in this community. So I'm vested and interested in the success. I love this community. We have about 3,000 employees, about a $600 million total budget. So working well with our employees, I think that's very important. As you mentioned, we try to be people-centered, purpose-driven, and data-informed, and that's kind of the 3 main philosophies that I lead with, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks, David. I really do appreciate you taking some time out of your day. Let me introduce our second panelist. Scott Neal is the city manager in Edina, Minnesota. Scott's been in local government and the chief executive officer for over 3 decades, including some time in Iowa and Tennessee. Scott's a really well-respected and recognized leader in the profession nationally as well as in Minnesota. He's an active member with ICMA and a past president of the Minnesota City County Managers Association. And I really value having Scott as a friend and a colleague in Minnesota, and really appreciate the value he brings in supporting managers in transition and the ICMA Fellowship Program. I know he's a big fan of the Vikings, professional soccer, and a good craft beer, but I'm probably missing something, Scott. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more, I'd really appreciate it.
Beer. That sounds good right now, doesn't it? At a bar with people, you know, we've been in a shutdown mode for a long time in Minnesota. My name is Scott Neal. I'm the city manager here. It is a beautiful community of 50,000 people that's right on the southwest corner of Minneapolis. It's an affluent suburb. It's a place that carries a lot of weight, I think, in the Twin Cities, and I'm happy to have the gig here. I've got 3 adult sons, one that lives in South Minneapolis, one that lives in Vienna, Austria, and one that lives in Shanghai, China. So family Zoom calls are complicated because somebody's always in the middle of the night when you got that group. I have one granddaughter who lives in Vienna, Austria, that I play Mario Kart with on a regular basis, and we have a good time. So it's good to be here, and thanks for asking me, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. It's really nice to have you part of this. And I'm really pleased to introduce Mike Van Milligen, who's the city manager in Dubuque, Iowa, and has been so since '93. I didn't realize this, Mike, but Dubuque has been recognized 3 times as an All-American city by the National Civic League, which by itself is just a great indicator of the leadership that you've provided to the community. Mike also has served on the ICMA Board of Directors as a Midwest Vice President, and has been featured on as part of the Harvard University John F. Kennedy School of Government Innovators in Public Service series. Mike's been recognized many, many other times. He was named the National Academy of Public Administration Fellow, was a recipient of the Dwight Inc. Public Service Award by Iowa State University. I tell you, Mike, one of the things I really value about your leadership in your community is the value that you place on the economic impact and the overall quality of life that performing arts and just public art presents to the community. That's something that I think a lot of communities take for granted, and I really appreciate how you have brought that to the forefront in Dubuque. But Mike, thanks for being here, and I'd love for you if you'd share a little bit more.
Oh, thanks, Matt. Thanks for that acknowledgement about the arts. It is very important to our community. You must have been reading an old document, because actually we've now won the National Civic League All-America City designation 5 times.
Oh my.
In their over 50-year history, the only community that's won that many times in such a short period of time. But it's not about me. It's about working in a great town with great people. So the mayor and city council has charged us with creating an equitable community of choice, and everything we do is around that idea of equity and choice, and that we know people have a choice of where they want to be. And it's a special challenge, but a great opportunity. On a personal perspective, my wife and I, we have 5 children of our own. We've had almost 30 children live in our home over our lifetime, because we've been foster parents, had foreign exchange students, had just other people live with us that needed a helping hand. And matter of fact, we're blessed to be raising 2 little boys right now that are both in middle school, and they're thrilled. As of Monday, it started full-time. They were getting pretty tired of that hybrid model. And for our Minnesota connection, my daughter is the public works director in Woodbury, Minnesota. So that's a stone's throw from Edina, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And my son is moving there next first week of March from Chicago.
To Woodbury? Or just
Yeah,
somewhere in the cities?
wherever that giant lake is, it's the biggest lake in the Minneapolis area. Gonna live on that.
All right.
Mike, thanks a lot for being here. So let's kind of get into the conversation. The topic of the conversation today is really centered on maintaining a sense of community in a socially distanced world. Without question, COVID-19 has just totally disrupted any sense of normalcy in any of our communities. And just given that unsettled environment, it's more important than ever to try to figure out, how do you maintain a meaningful connection with community stakeholders? We need to make sure we understand the current needs and priorities, because everything has been turned upside down. And just as importantly, residents want to make sure that they have the sense that they're being heard on things that are going on in the community. It's got to be authentic. It's got to be a two-way. It's got to be an important part of creating this overall sense of the community. Obviously, the pandemic creates a lot of challenges. And so the opportunity today is really to hear about what creative approaches all of you are taking to help maintain the sense of community and successfully engage with your residents.
Matt, this is Mike Van Milligen. So I don't know how creative it is, but when this hit, was March 11th, I think, was when they declared it a pandemic. We had the foresight anyway to realize this was going to be no ordinary crisis. And we got our 100-member leadership team together for a day-long session and asked them several questions about, as we enter this crisis, how do we think we should react to it? And one of the questions was, if this all turns out badly, what would we want to be proud of that we said and did? And so we ended up coming up with, they identified a set of principles that they wanted to operate under during the pandemic. And they wanted to prioritize employee and public trust through partnerships and transparency. They wanted to emphasize essential city services, especially for the most vulnerable residents and businesses. And strategically, they wanted to be creative, innovative, and adaptable. And so we let our own employees define how we were going to deal with this. And I think it was a very effective thing to do because obviously they took ownership of that since it was their definition. And then the communication things we've done is at least twice a month, we have a public meeting with the city council, to public health specialists and others, the budget director, all report to the community on what's happening. It's a public session. And in addition, we started a daily phone call with all employees. And so it has the city manager, the public health specialist, the human resources director, and a couple of other people who are on every call. It's at noon, and anybody can jump on. We have 700 employees, and it'll accommodate up to 1,000 callers at a time. We've had the most we've had is about 200. And we just switched about a month ago to doing it only 3 times a week, but we were doing it 5 times a week for over 6 months.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. We're going to be going through a series of questions, and we'll try to incorporate those into that conversation in just a couple of minutes. But I appreciate that insight into what you're doing in the community. One thing I wanted to do in kind of kicking off the topic was really just to kind of describe at a high level what the issues are. You know, I think all of us would share that even in good times, it's difficult to engage with the community. And so as you think about the barriers that traditional public engagement presents to a community, now you throw on COVID and you're doing homeschooling, and organizationally you're meeting virtually, and everybody's just trying to survive and make it through the pandemic and all of the other issues that are challenging. So all of the political divisions that are impacting all of our communities, the COVID issue and the last year and all of the issues that have come up in the last year have just really created a really unique situation that communities need to react to. And the whole purpose behind this conversation is to really benefit from what you're doing as a community. So let's kick into what I wanted to cover today in the conversation. There's 3 questions that I wanted to explore. And Mike, you've addressed some of them, but let me just kind of go over them again. The first one is, how has your communication and engagement strategy evolved since the beginning of the pandemic? The second one is, how does resident engagement influence your success in maintaining a sense of community? And the third one is, which tools do you currently use to measure feedback from a resident's perspective during these challenging times? And as we kick off to the first question, David, I'd like to start with you. Could you just talk a little bit about how Greensboro's communication and engagement strategy has evolved since the start of the pandemic?
Yeah, I don't know that it's completely innovative, but like we're doing here, a lot of our platforms have moved virtually, obviously. But, you know, to address the question, you know, I kind of would think about it in 2 separate ways, internally and externally. I think Mike talked about employees, also talked about the community. So internally, we've done some of the same things. We've had all employee virtual meetings. We've had up to 500 people at times on those. Back in the summertime, when we had some of the concerns with the death of George Floyd and the fallout from that, we had some employee meetings where there were tears, where there were some yelling and some honest conversation, but it was helpful. So we've offered that. We've also evolved into our equity and inclusion office has started employee resource groups. And so really offering opportunity for kind of really drill down opportunities for employees in smaller settings to be able to have even more candid conversations in groups. And we committed to have someone from my office be there at the kickoff of those meetings, and then let those employees obviously have their own time to kind of talk and think through strategies and opportunities for themselves to better engage, and also to recommend policy changes internally, how we can improve. We've also tried to, during this time, have opportunities to talk about your personal well-being, because it's been a trying time for our employees, just as it is for community members. So we've offered engagement opportunities and wellness opportunities for those individuals that need it. We've also, we did our annual engagement survey, employee engagement survey, but we tweaked it a little bit to try to address some of the COVID concerns and equity concerns that might exist. We had close to 1,100 responses with that, and we're working through those responses now to try to actually put some action steps into making some changes. We've incorporated more cross-departmental, interdepartmental teams, even if they've had to be virtual. Communication, strategic planning. We've even had some plan ahead teams during all this. How do we start thinking forward in the future to be kind of like what Mike was talking about? What do we want to be when we either get through this or as we go through this? From an external perspective, just using our social media platforms, sharing content, but not content only just specific to what the city's doing, but, in North Carolina, how can we help communicate from a state, from a county perspective, from a federal perspective, information that we may not be responsible for, but helping to educate our community about what's going on. And also, I think too, for the folks that do more of the social media stuff than I do, I think they've done a pretty good job of trying to incorporate some humor, some lighthearted information, just to keep people engaged, but also kind of positive and make it not seem so static, I guess, from a just pure city perspective. So I think we've tried to keep it fun. The last thing I would say too is where we've typically done in-person meeting, we've tried to move all those community meetings to a virtual platform. So many kind of town halls. Several of our council members are hosting town halls virtually where staff will be present as well to provide information more on a drilled down basis of projects and policies that might impact a particular district. And myself, I host a bi-monthly downtown center city briefing. We had about 70 people on there last week. And just, again, offering updates on projects and activities that the city has going on, but also some of our nonprofits. And then we share, any updates that may be pertaining to that particular moment at the time. So trying to keep a balance of internal and external and keep it lighthearted too. Hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I know in North Carolina, there's a lot regional at a regional level. Is your engagement strategy, are you incorporating things on a regional scale or collaborating regionally on engagement generally?
We're a member of our council of government, but most of the engagement that we're doing would either be locally here within the city, but we're also pretty good partners as well with our county. In North Carolina, the county has responsibility for public health. And so they are, for example, administering the vaccinations. They take the lead on a lot of the public health matters. So we're trying to support and help inform, but using their messaging, also some of our neighboring cities too. And from an internal perspective too, I've been able to be a part of just even conversations with my fellow city managers across the state of North Carolina. That's been helpful, just to share ideas and say, what's going on? What are y'all thinking about with your employees? What are you thinking about with the community? Closures, opening, how are you opening? So that's been very helpful, if nothing else, just to get on a Zoom call like this and say, what are y'all doing? How are you handling this? Or heads up, this is coming your way. We've had this come through our community too. So those activities have been very helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Scott, could you share how your communication and engagement strategy has changed in Edina over the year?
Well, your question used the term evolved, right? So when I think of the word evolved, I think of it from a biological standpoint. Something it evolves when it becomes more sophisticated. And I think that's how I would describe our engagement and communication strategies, over the last 12 months. We've had to become more sophisticated because we have had to migrate to an entire virtual environment. My city hall has been closed since middle of March 2020. We haven't had a live council meeting, city council meeting during that entire time. So we have had to evolve just to keep operations moving forward. And I think a couple of things, Matt. One, I think we become much more deliberate about how we use our various platforms, right? So We're not trying to communicate, for example, complex ideas and policy options through Twitter or Instagram, but we are trying to use those two platforms to drive people to other platforms where we are able to have a more sophisticated discussion, for example. And we've been doing a lot of that over the last 12 months. I'd say the other item that we have evolved on is that communications and engagement is not just something for the communications and engagement employees to do. Our communication, we're fortunate that we've got a full-time community engagement employee on our staff, but her job isn't just to be that face that appears to the community. Her job is to bring more people from other operating departments, from engineering and public works and police and fire, et cetera, bring them into the communications process as well. She's done a really good job of that, and I think that's been good. It's been an evolution for those operating departments too. The final thing that I would say is that our city council has figured out a new way to do public hearings. And again, like a lot of places have all over the country, we still conduct virtual public hearings to receive conventional public input. We will have to do that for the foreseeable future just because of state law and code. But we have evolved into other platforms where we have constructed ways to communicate public hearing opportunities, to receive public input, to process that public input, and to give that public input to our city council, so it can be considered as just as they consider the more conventionally received public input they might receive at a council meeting. So those are three areas where I think we have evolved, and it's been good for our organization.
Scott, anything that you would suggest for other communities that are interested in reaching out or engaging with their business population? You know, you've got such a vibrant business community. Have you done anything unique in that area that other people can benefit from?
You know, I think our interaction has been to be supportive of Chamber of Commerce and other business associations, to not jump in front of them, but to be supportive of them and to provide assistance to them in a regular dialogue, opportunities for dialogue, any way that we can. And so, yeah, we have done that, but not as a lead, but not in a lead role. We've done it more as a support role.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And Mike, I'd like for you to. I do want to pose a question to you about how your communication and engagement strategy has evolved over the course of the past year. I appreciate your earlier comments, but I do want to capture it because we'll be recording this and sharing this. So, could you do another snapshot of how you have evolved in your engagement over the past year?
So we've made sure that the community has plenty of opportunities to learn what's going on, because we think transparency is the most important thing here. So we have twice a month sessions with our city council. So before every city council meeting, our public health specialist gives a report to the council. And of course, anybody can view that and the media attends. In addition, then to that, we have one special session every month that all it is COVID, and it's with the city council. And that's also a public meeting. And in addition to that, we've created 2 12-page mailers during this last year, all about COVID and its impact on the community. And that's gone to all 22,500 businesses and homes in Dubuque as a mailer. And then we also did a similar 4-page mailer on the impact on the city budget that went to every home and business in town. So our real goal is to push information out, because the biggest problem is the fear of the unknown. And so we want people to know what is happening and how can they impact it. So for instance, one of the things we did was our sustainability coordinator engaged 50 low-income people in a conversation about how is it impacting them. And we can help use that information to inform how we can better help our low-income residents. And as I mentioned earlier, internally, we have a daily phone call at noon, where the city manager, the human resources director, the public health specialist, and others are on the call and make presentations. And we have 700 employees, as many that want to be on that call. We can accommodate up to 1,000 callers. And we've had over 200 people on the call at a time. And we've switched now to that. So it's no longer 5 days a week. We've switched it to 3 days a week.
Yeah, that's really healthy from an organizational standpoint. Have you been doing a lot with your business community, thinking externally?
Yeah, well, we were fortunate there. So we have a partnership with a private not-for-profit development corporation. We provide them a significant amount of funding. And they have 2 employees and have for a very, very long time, that their full-time job is to interview CEOs. So they interview over 300 CEOs every single year. And then I meet with them every Wednesday morning from 10:30 to noon. And what they do is they go over with me what the results of their interviews from the week before. And sometimes, it's a big deal. Somebody wants to do a huge expansion. And sometimes it's a little deal. There's a pothole in front of their business and they wish somebody would fix it. And so that relationship already existed. And so we've continued in that. Just the conversation has changed a little bit to talk about COVID impacts.
Yeah, and you've been doing that for a while, I suspect. So you've already made those connections historically.
Yeah, we've been doing it actually for almost 20 years, and it's just tremendously successful.
Yeah, I just really commend you for that work. And the reason I bring that up is because so many times communities get into engagement or building those relationships when a crisis happens. But you have a culture, a community culture that focuses in on creating those relationships and maintaining them, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's outstanding. Scott, let's move on to the second question. How do you think engagement influences your success in Edina in maintaining its sense of community?
This is an interesting question because we represent 3 different kinds of communities, and in my community, I think one of the bigger takeaways as it goes to this question, Matt, is that our engagement really reminds city staff that there's a strong sense of community in this community. And that's important because we really have a very low number of employees that live in the community, right? It's way less than 10%. The community is, as I've said before, is an affluent community. Housing is very expensive. And really staff, there's not a lot of staff that live in the community. And so there is this separation in some ways that we got to overcome as city staff members to understand the sense of community. How do we respond to it? How do we bolster it? But it's really important that we understand that, because the community does have a very strong sense of itself and its history and its place in the Twin Cities. And I think you know what I'm talking about there. Yeah. So that's one of the most important things that we get from our engagement. And we transmit that sort of laterally in our organization and also up through our city council as well.
Scott, and this maybe can be responded by the other 2 panelists as well, but have you experienced any increase in the level of participation in some of the engagement activities since the pandemic started and being virtually?
Big increases. I think and I think initially that was a little bit of a surprise. But we've seen a significant increase in the amount of engagement activity and people engaging with us, not just on public safety issues, but on community issues across all of our different platforms. It's been very interesting to watch.
One of the interesting things our research has shown is that the overall levels of trust have actually increased in local government. And I think it is in part because of that connection and some of the virtual connections that are now being made, that people are now finding it easier and more convenient to be engaged on the things that are impacting them, kind of on a day-to-day basis.
Well, so, I hope you're right about that. We've got our biennial Polco quality of life survey coming up. So that's one of the things I hope is a result for us.
That's great. Thanks, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, how does engagement play into your success in maintaining your sense of community in Dubuque?
Well, I know this conversation is in the context of COVID-19, but really that question is in the context of the Black Lives Matters movement. So, you know, all our communities were impacted by the tragedies that happened, and you know, some of them up in the Minnesota area. And fortunately, we already had a strong relationship with the minority members in the community. We've had what we call an inclusive Dubuque initiative for about 6 or 7 years now. We have over 60 businesses and organizations that participate in that. There's constant dialogue and meetings and creating structure to advance the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when that hit, it was a tragedy like any other community, and a whole bunch of new players started coming forward and joining the conversation. So for us as a community, since we didn't have any of the tragedies, it actually was an extremely healthy event. There were protests march, none of them violent, but for instance, the police chief and I participated in the first protest march. So we were all in it together. And it really has launched for us what I think in 2021 is going to be a great movement towards advancing our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. As a matter of fact, I just finished the budget recommendation last week, and we're going to recommend about 4 new positions for the city to do things like criminal diversion programs, poverty reduction programs, and the community, I feel like, is very much behind the initiatives.
That's great. And I have to just think that your success in your maintaining the sense of community is really based a lot on the work that you have been doing over the last decades of your leadership in the community. Is that a fair thing to say?
Well, I wouldn't relate it to my leadership in the community because we have some tremendous leaders, and I'm just part of a really talented team. Our political leadership is just fabulous. But the answer to your question would be yes. I mean, the reason we've been recognized 5 times by the National Civic League for the All-America City Award is that I've always called it the Academy Award of Community Engagement. You have to have a really solid community engagement plan to even be one of the 30 finalists, to be even considered to be one of the 10 selected, and then to be selected 5 times. It's a recognition that on the community engagement side, we're working really hard.
Yeah, that's just congratulations to you and the community and everybody that is involved with building that kind of community culture. David, how has engagement influenced Greensboro's sense of community in over the past year?
Yeah, I took a step back too when you first said it as well. I mean, just answering the question of how does engagement influence success, it's vital because you can see it. I'm sure Scott and Mike and others have seen it. You could have a very good project. You could have a very sound business case or a public case to propose or advance said project, but without informing or being transparent or engaging in that community, it can be stopped or turned down. So it's very important, I think even more so this year, to maintain or gain any trust with the community. That engagement is very critical. It's been a struggle. I mean, I know that there is, you mentioned that, perhaps, and trust is increasing, but I think we've had to work at it for those communities that have put the work in. I think that that's critical to the future success. But it's been a challenge. I think but it's been a good challenge for us to really rethink how, I think, as Scott said, how do we evolve? How do we grow and improve our engagement strategies? But we have a strong sense of community. We have a very vocal and active community. We are a university city. We have about 50 to 60,000, give or take, university students in our city. We have a lot of, and then the staff and faculty with associated. We have the largest historically Black college in America, NC-A&T. We have a large university system with UNC Greensboro, and we have several other really great institutions. So that's kind of the part of our fabric of our community as well. We also are the start of the sit-in movement. Woolworths here in Greensboro, we have the International Civil Rights Museum. So we have a lot of tradition and heritage in that regard. And this year was not unlike any that we had lots of protests, a lot of good demonstrations. Again, I mentioned our staff even, we had 300 plus staff people meet out here in front of City Hall at my invitation and our staff's invitation. And we walked around our block in solidarity. So we've done a lot of good things. I will say, we've done also some innovative things, I think, from our cultural and our arts and our parks and recreation and our library system. We did a Greensboro GSO online. So even when things had to be virtual or still have to be virtual, we didn't try to negate, to Mike's point, we have a very strong arts community as well. So how do we engage online? And our library and park system and art system even came up with things where you could come pick up kits. You don't have to just log into a Zoom. They had kits that people could come pick up and take it home or take it to a park. Today, for instance, when we're recording this, we have a mystery book club event taking place through our library. And our library is also offering an opportunity to learn how to draw in Minecraft. I may log into that. I mean, who knows? Keeping it fun, keeping it engaged, but also recognizing there's some serious things that we need to change and we need to get input from our community. We've opened up our policies and our ordinances and said, all right, how do we change to be more inclusive in ways that we didn't think that we ever would? We got rid of our library fines. I've used that probably way too much as an example, but I think it's a great example where, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, no one would have thought about that being impacting people that are, disadvantaged or low income, but it does. And we decided as a library system to get rid of that. So taking some of that feedback and engaging with our community, I think is important, because if you don't, regardless of how good of a project it is, it's not going to advance because people will question it and they won't support it. So
yeah, that's great insight. One of the things that you had mentioned earlier that I really want to bring back up is I really appreciate what I'm hearing you talk about the focus, the internal focus that you're placing on the organization and the impact that has on creating the community culture and probably the way that all of your employees interact with the community and just kind of the feeling that they take out into their jobs on a daily basis. And it sounds like just a really solid way that you're creating a culture in the organization. Anything you want to add more on that?
All I'll say is I had a mentor many years ago, a city manager, and he made it clear that this organization, and I'll say this organization, but the organization we were in, but I tell our employees, this organization does not revolve around me. I can't be out when we're picking up trash. I can't be at every park. So I really view my job is to make sure that we prepare our employees, we inform on that, we empower our employees with as many tools and abilities as possible, because they're the ones that really go out and touch our community and impact our community. And I'm proud to be just really a member of this team, to be quite honest.
Yeah, that's very well stated. Thank you, and great work.
Hey, Matt, David mentioned the arts community participating in this whole process. I'd just like to mention our arts community came to us and had an idea to put what they called a solidarity mural on the side of our civic center. And what it is a series of raised fists, all different colors. And in addition, all different designations. For instance, one has a rainbow bracelet on, one has a wheelchair tattoo. And so I approved painting of that mural on the side of the Civic Center called the Solidarity mural. It spells out the word solidarity. And it was really very healthy because it generated tremendous community dialogue around it. Some people for it, some people against it. But the beauty was that it caused people to talk about the issue. And it turned out to be very healthy, and it's been very popular in our community. The other thing I want to mention, I know it's not COVID, but is this community engagement idea. So, and I think it can be translated into COVID, but we had an area of our community that flooded. We had 6 presidential disaster declarations in just over 10 years. And so instead of us telling the community in the neighborhood, as a matter of fact, the poorest neighborhood in our community, what we were going to do about it, the council appointed a 40-member citizen task force from the neighborhood, gave them the resources of an engineering design firm. And a year later, they came back with a $232 million fix. And guess what? Passed a new stormwater fee that every home and business pays. It was quite frankly non-controversial, as you can believe it. And we're in the midst of doing that $232 million project. That would have never happened if we had told the neighborhood how we thought we were going to fix their problem.
Yeah, that is a great insight, Mike. Thanks. Very, very cool project. You know, Mike, why don't we just continue on with you? Can you talk about the tools that Dubuque is using to help measure feedback from your residents and businesses?
So we haven't been a community that has adopted a community survey as done by the city government. Our Development Corporation, they do a community survey every year. I like the disassociation from city government because, you know, I think there's always that suspicion that maybe we just kind of sort of cook the books on the results. And so that Development Corporation releases that survey every year and helps the community understand and identify what the issues are. The other thing is every August, the mayor and city council has a 3-day strategic planning session with a professional facilitator, and they set the 5-year goals for the community and then the 1-year priorities that they feel have the best chance to get us on the road to achieving their 5-year goals. That's the information I use to build the $200 million city budget. But we have an engagement process before the council meets in August so they can have feedback from the community. And then the boards and commissions, which are citizens boards and commissions, after the goals and priorities are set, have an opportunity to interact with our departments to help inform what should be our budget proposal that's submitted in February. So those are two really key components for us.
Mike, have the pre-engagement work before your strategic planning? I don't know that a lot of communities do that, but what advice would you give to communities that are hearing this and they would love to know how successful that is? Especially like your boards and commissions, which I think is a really great idea. So
the pre-engagement part, what you got to remember is you got to meet people where they're at. So we tried the come to us stuff. It doesn't work. So we go out in the community. We go to the neighborhood meetings and make sure it's well known that we're going to be there seeking input on prior to what the council is going to be meeting to talk about their goals and priorities. We make sure anybody who contacts us during the year with any idea, we tell them the exact dates of the council goals and priorities. Say, if you want this idea considered, you need to flush it out and get it to the council before these dates. So it's not, it's very intentional that we constantly are pushing out the idea that, hey, we're going to build our work plan off of that August session. So if you want expansion of the art museum in that work plan or whatever it is, you better go talk, you better submit something before August so the council can at least consider it, because they'll start out with 100 things on the list and only about 15 things end up in the end. But guess what? Like Michael Jordan said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if your thing's not on there, it's not getting considered.
And how successful has your engagement been in that effort?
Well, I can tell you that if I've been the city manager here for 28 years, and it's interesting to survive that long in one community in one position. But if anybody said, you have any secret to that success, I will just tell you that annual priority and goal setting session is the secret. I've worked for 23 different council members, 3 different mayors, but it all comes down to if you've got an agenda, a personal agenda or political agenda, whatever it is, as a council person, and of course everybody does, because that's why they're on the council. The way to get it implemented is to show up in August, make a compelling argument for it. It gets on that list. Guess what? We're doing
it. Yeah, that's excellent. And I think that is just such great input for communities to hear. So thanks for sharing your process. I think that discipline that your community has gotten into over the course of a long time is leads directly into why Dubuque is the community that it is. So thanks for that input. David, let's ask you the same question. What tools are you using in Greensboro to help you measure feedback from residents?
I'm just glad you invited me to be on this panel with Scott and Mike. Glad to be. We do not. I think the last time Greensboro did a formal citizen survey was probably the early 2000s. So we've started looking at doing one about a year ago. So I think it's important. We've done one in the community I was in before, and it does at least give a realistic. We do have different departments, so we have little surveys that go out when departments are doing activities. So police, planning just wrapped up our comp plan revamp. We just did that last year. Very extensive process for community engagement, solicitation of ideas. We just did a housing plan, a parks plan. So as we've done in the last couple of years, various plans, we've certainly had a very formal process within those activities to get resident feedback and incorporate them into the planning of our 5, 10, 15 years kind of strategies there. But as far as a holistic across the board, annual or every other year survey, we do not do that. One tool that we just do on a regular basis, like a lot of, we have emails to council, emails to myself. We also have an community engagement office that is constantly getting contact from neighborhoods. We're setting up meetings with neighborhoods. They're responding back to even simple things about how can I get my trash can replaced. And then our council is very active as well, hosting meetings out in the community virtually. We also use a tool, and I've mentioned this, I think, at another point in time, but Zen City, I know a lot of other places are doing it just to kind of gauge feedback and interactions with our social media platforms and what are people reacting to. So it gives a kind of a measurement of our public sentiment in that regard. So it doesn't drive where we go or how we spend money or decisions necessarily, but it does help us give a reality, kind of a snapshot of what's really going on social media, and helps us kind of react or counter those.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Have you been, do you get information from Zen City that allows you then to follow up on whatever the topics of the day are, or are you finding any methods to do that?
Yeah. And we've also started sharing it too. I don't know if I said this earlier, with our county counterparts as well. So letting them know, like, as they're responsible for vaccinations and sentiment or concerns that may be out there about that, we've been able to communicate that back and help respond and react to appropriately with positive and good information. So,
yeah. Okay. Great. Well, I'm glad you're here as well, as long as with the other guys.
Yeah.
Scott, what tools are you using in Edina for measuring resident feedback in your community?
Probably all the same that other communities are. We measure clicks, we measure views, we measure page views, we measure the length of view on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, our website, etc. We measure the number of comments that we receive on our engagement site, bettertogetheredina.org, excuse me. And so those are just more the conventional piece, but we do a biennial quality of life survey. We do it with Polko, and I've been doing it with them since I came to Edina in 2010. It's a high stakes survey. There's no way to kind of talk around that. It's important data to our city council. It's important to staff. We use it as sort of the lead, kind of the kickoff of our budget and work planning process. We have a biennial budget process here. So we start with getting some council direction. At the same time, we're getting our survey organized. We're doing that actually right now. The survey data will come back. We'll get together with our council again. We'll do some analysis on it and check ourselves to see if we're going in the right direction in terms of large policy issues, but also things we got to fix, on the inside and current operations. So that's an important part of our analysis. We do a lot of crosstabs with it and a deep dive into the data. It's a treasure chest full of information that we use every day almost in our organization.
Yeah, and because I know your community so well, Scott, I want to just compliment you. It does have such a strong reputation for being data driven and benefiting from a solid engagement approach. So kudos to you and your staff for the work that you're doing. Just in the final minutes that we have, I do want to just provide you all an opportunity to ask each other questions if there's anything that you want to take advantage of. Anything come to mind? Not critical. That's fine. Thank you. Let me just kind of finish things up then. First of all, by thanking all of you for being here. You know, this is really just an excellent panel. All of you bring such talent and skills and experience to the communities that you're managing. You know, particularly the value that you place in your organization and recognizing that you're really just the guy that's running the orchestra, and that you really do rely on the talent in the organization. You've all been taking advantage of all of the technologies that are available for engaging with the community, but also, like Mike has talked about, you've got to go to them as well. That personal interaction is always such an important part of doing engagement and being creative and evolve to the circumstances that are confronting all the communities today. And all of you, I think, are probably performing with excellence on maintaining the sense of community in each of your communities, just based on the work that you're doing. So thank you for your perspectives and all of the insights that you have provided that other local governments are really going to value and benefit from. I will follow up this interview. Love to just connect with you. I'll share all of your contact information. So if there are questions that any of you have for each other, you can know how to get a hold of each other. And we do these panel conversations every Thursday at 11 o'clock. So if there's anybody else that you think would be good for participating in this panel conversation and that their perspectives could benefit other local government leaders, I'd appreciate you sending them my way. We will be sending you the links to the highlight segments for your comments and all of the input that you provided so that you can share it on your LinkedIn networks and any other networks that you want to share with. I mean, the idea is to share your perspectives and let others take advantage of your expertise and your history and your experience. And then finally, I would love to get feedback from all of you in terms of how this panel goes and anything that you think might improve how I perform and deliver the conversation. I think it's a valuable conversation to have, and I would really value any input or suggestions that you have. So with that, I would just love to thank you for participating and sharing an hour of your day in this conversation, and wish you the best of luck with everything that you're doing.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Nice to meet both of you, Scott,
Nice
Mike.
meeting you guys.
Thanks to all of you.